So coming back to our question, under which conditions may the following respire anaerobically? Yeast may respire anaerobically in stagnant solution. Stagnant is something whereby the solution is not flowing, there is no motion. Stagnant, still. So if solutions are stagnant, especially if there are sugars within, and the solutions are stagnant, then yeast will respire anaerobically. Yeast also respires anaerobically in the center of decomposing fruits and organic matter. Have you ever eaten a mango? When that mango is ripe, but it has become too ripe, then as you're eating this mango, you reach a particular part in the center which is much softer. The appearance is different. It is much softer, and it has a smell of alcohol. That particular part, it means anaerobic respiration has taken place, leading to formation of alcohol. That is why we say it occurs in the center of those decomposing fruits. That is why I've said the fruit that has become too ripe and is beginning to decompose, and even in the center of organic matter. Then in flowering plants, where do we have anaerobic respiration? Remember, it occurs in absence of oxygen. 1. In seeds at the onset of germination. In growth and development, we shall see that when seeds are put in the soil, germination begins with a process of water uptake called imbibition. When water is taken up by these seeds, imbibition, the water activates the enzymes within the seeds. These enzymes then speed up the breakdown of the stored foods into simple foods like starch to reducing sugars or to glucose. But at the same time, during that time, there is breakdown of that glucose to generate energy, which energy is needed for more germination to take place. This means that at that time, because the seed is still within the soil, the seed coat has not yet ruptured to bring in much oxygen. The oxygen at that time that enters the seed through the micropyle is very little oxygen. Therefore, most of the respiration at that time, at the onset of germination, is anaerobic respiration, until the time when the seed coat ruptures and the seed can take in much oxygen, promoting aerobic respiration. But at the onset of germination, it is majorly anaerobic respiration. Then you also talk of the center of the fruits. I think I've already explained that. Then at the center of large stems, stems have pores called lenticels. Lenticels. These are pores through which exchange of gases takes place. But if the stem is too large, oxygen will enter but may not reach the center of the large stem. That is why we are putting the word large stems, meaning at the center of that large stem, respiration will purely be anaerobic. Now there are other plants with stems which don't have lenticels, whereby they obtain their gases through the stomata in leaves, and then these gases reach the cells of the stem through a network of intercellular air spaces. But these may not reach the center of the large stems. Therefore, they will end up respiring anaerobically. Roots that grow in compacted or waterlogged soils. Remember, one of the components of soil is air. But if a soil is waterlogged, the spaces that should be filled with air are now filled with water, meaning the air is displaced by the water. This means that those waterlogged soils, instead of having air, they have water. Therefore, the roots will not get the desired oxygen. What follows? They end up respiring anaerobically. Same applies to soils that have been compacted, meaning when air spaces within have been compacted and there isn't air. Therefore, they also end up respiring anaerobically. Then, in aquatic plants, some aquatic plants growing in stagnant ponds. You must have seen water which is stagnant in a particular area, maybe around your home, somewhere, anywhere. When you find water that is stagnant, we usually say stagnant water is a breeding ground for mosquito larvae. But that stagnant water, you may find some organisms, some plants within. These plants, because the water is deficient of oxygen, these plants living in water, the ones we are calling aquatic plants, will end up respiring anaerobically. And lastly, in mammals respire anaerobically where the high oxygen demands, the demands for oxygen are really high. Like when you do a vigorous exercise, you run, you sprint, you use a lot of energy. Time comes and the oxygen supply is lower than the oxygen demand. Therefore, the body respires anaerobically. Some applies to pregnant females. Pregnancy at a particular stage, where the oxygen demands are too high, higher than the supply, then respiration becomes anaerobic. Emphysema, or conditions of inefficiency of the lungs. The lungs contain alveoli, and these are surfaces for gaseous exchange. They are the respiratory surfaces. But there are times or there are conditions when they are inefficient, like emphysema, common among the cigarette smokers. These people who smoke, that smoke damages the inner lining of the alveolus. When it damages the inner lining of the alveolus, that means the alveoli can no longer function as an efficient respiratory surface. Exchange cannot occur because their lining becomes thicker. It becomes thicker, affecting the exchange of gases. Meaning at such a point, the tissues will not receive enough oxygen at a rate at which it is required. What follows? The tissues will now respire anaerobically. It is a similar thing with this pandemic that we're experiencing all over, COVID. Because these viruses again attack the lungs. When they affect the lungs, exchange of gases can no longer take place effectively because the virus harms the lungs, the lining of the alveoli, affecting gaseous exchange. What follows? The tissues will not get oxygen. Then anaerobic respiration comes in. But remember, the effects of anaerobic respiration in mammals, lactic acid, which is not good to the body. Then when there is a reduction in blood supply to a body part, remember oxygen in the body of mammals is transported within blood by a pigment known as hemoglobin in a form called oxyhemoglobin. Therefore, if there is reduction of supply of blood to a part of the body, that means that body part will not get the required oxygen in the amounts that it is needed. If it does not get the required oxygen, what follows whenever the supply is lower than the demand? What happens? Anaerobic respiration. Low oxygen carrying capacity. We've heard of anemia, sickle cell anemia, where the red blood cells are sickle-shaped, reducing the capacity to carry oxygen. This means that the tissues are supplied with little or less oxygen. What follows? With less or little oxygen to the tissues? Anaerobic respiration. Low cardiac output. Cardiac output, like if the heartbeat rate is slow. Cardiac output will mean the volume of blood pumped out of the heart in a single heartbeat. If the heart pumps little blood, or if the heart rate is slow, the number of times the heart beats per minute, or within a given period of time. If it is slow, the tissues will get little blood. The tissues will get little blood. Coronary thrombosis. Remember thrombosis where we talked about a clot of blood forming within the blood vessels. That clot may remain at that atherotic site, or it may be carried within blood and it blocks another tiny blood vessel. We talked about thrombosis and embolism. Thrombosis and embolism. A thrombus and an embolus. We remember that in transport. Then inadequate capillary network. If the tissues do not have enough capillaries to bring about the supply of oxygen to them, then respiration will be anaerobic. We give an example of angina. Remember, angina is acute pain in the chest as a result of the coronary muscles not getting enough oxygen supply due to reduced blood supply. That condition causing acute pain in the chest but originating from the walls of, from the muscles of the heart, the cardiac muscles, is what we call angina. During hibernation, a state of dormancy in organisms, they may respire anaerobically. Sperms in the oviduct, before fertilization occurs, they equally respire anaerobically because there is no oxygen in the oviduct. Then at high altitude, because the higher the altitude, the lower the oxygen tension, or the lower the oxygen partial pressure. Therefore, at a high altitude, a mammal may respire anaerobically. So those are the conditions when those organisms may respire anaerobically.